The entire restaurant went dead silent. You could hear a pin drop, except for the ear-splitting screams of a 6-month-old baby. But this wasn't just any baby. This was the heir to the Russo crime family, and the man holding him looked ready to burn the city to the ground just to make the crying stop. His bodyguards had their hands on their holsters. The manager was shaking. No one dared to move. No one, except for a 23-year-old waitress who had nothing left to lose. She walked right up to the barrel of the gun, touched the baby's cheek, and whispered 3 words that changed everything. But she had no idea that calming the baby was the easy part. Surviving the father. That was going to be impossible. The rain was hammering against the plate glass windows of the Obsidian Chicago's most exclusive supper club. Inside, the air smelled of truffle oil, aged scotch, and fear. Sophie Miller adjusted her apron, trying to keep her hands from trembling. She had been working here for exactly 3 weeks. She knew the rules. Keep your head down, don't make eye contact with the VIPs in the back booths, and never, ever spill a drop. But tonight, the rules didn't matter. Tonight, he was here. Dominic Russo. Even people who didn't watch the news knew the name. He was 32, with a jawline that looked like it was carved from granite and eyes that were cold enough to freeze hell over. He wore a charcoal 3-piece suit that cost more than Sophie's entire life earnings. But the most terrifying thing wasn't the 2 armed men flanking him, or the way the restaurant manager, Mr. Henderson, was sweating through his shirt. It was the baby carrier in Dominic's hand. A baby. The terrifying Don of the Russo syndicate had brought a baby into a Michelin star restaurant at 9:00 p.m. on a Friday. And the baby was screaming. It wasn't a fuss. It wasn't a whimper. It was a guttural, red-faced, lung-shredding shriek of pure panic. "Sir, perhaps a private room?" Mr. Henderson squeaked, wringing his hands. Dominic didn't even look at him. He was staring down at the car seat, set on the table, his expression a mix of exhaustion and barely suppressed rage. "He hates the private rooms," Dominic rasped. His voice was deep, scratching against the silence of the room. "He screams louder in the quiet." The baby kicked his legs, knocking over a crystal water glass. Smash, silence fell over the dining room again, broken only by the wails. A woman at table 4 whispered something to her husband. Dominic's head snapped toward them. The bodyguard, a hulking man named Sal, took a step toward the couple. They immediately looked down at their plates. "Do something," Dominic muttered to the nanny, standing behind him a terrified older woman named Martha. I've tried the bottle, Mr. Russo. I've tried the pacifier. He won't take it. He's colicky," Martha stammered. "He's not colicky," Dominic snapped. "He's been screaming for 4 hours." Sophie watched from the service station. She shouldn't interfere. She needed this job. Her rent was overdue, and her nursing school debt was drowning her. Getting fired tonight meant eviction next week. But she looked at the baby. He was tiny, maybe 6 months old. His face was blotchy red. His tiny fists were clenched so tight his knuckles were white. But Sophie noticed something everyone else missed. Everyone assumed the baby was angry or sick. Sophie saw his eyes. They were wide, darting frantically around the ceiling, flinching at the clatter of silverware, the heavy bass of the jazz music, the booming voices. He wasn't acting out. He was terrified. The crying reached a fever pitch. Dominic slammed his hand on the table. "Enough!" The baby screamed harder. Dominic looked ready to draw his weapon and shoot the ceiling lights out, just to get some peace. Sophie's feet moved before her brain could stop them. "Sophie, don't," another waitress, Jessica, hissed, grabbing her arm. "That's Dominic Russo. You walk over there. You might not walk back." Sophie pulled her arm free. She walked across the plush carpet. The sound of her sensible work shoes was swallowed by the floor. As she approached the VIP table, Sal, the bodyguard, stepped in her path, his hand going inside his jacket. Dominic looked up. His eyes were like dark tunnels. "What?" "I can help," Sophie said. Her voice shook, but she forced herself to hold his gaze. "You're a waitress," Dominic said, his lip curling. "Unless you have a shot of whiskey for him, get lost." "He doesn't need whiskey," Sophie said, stepping around the massive bodyguard. This was insane. She was going to die. "And he doesn't need milk." She reached the table. The baby Leo was thrashing. "Don't touch him," Dominic warned, his voice low and dangerous. "Look at his hands," Sophie said softly, ignoring the threat. "And look at his eyes." She didn't pick the baby up. That would be too invasive. Instead, she leaned down, getting to the baby's eye level. She took a deep breath. The restaurant was loud. The jazz band, the clinking glasses, the low murmur of tense conversation. It was sensory overload. Sophie reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a plain white napkin. She didn't wipe his face. Instead, she gently laid it over the baby's eyes, creating a soft white canopy. A shield. Then she leaned close to the car seat, right by the baby's ear, and hummed. A low, vibrating hum. Not a melody. Just a constant grounding noise. She placed her hand firmly on the baby's chest. Not patting, just holding. Heavy pressure. "He's overstimulated," Sophie whispered, though she was speaking to Dominic. "The lights, the noise, the smell of your cologne. It's too much." Dominic stiffened. "My cologne. Gunpowder and sandalwood." Sophie noted absently, her focus on the child. "It's sharp." Under her hand, the baby gasped. He hiccuped, and then the screaming stopped. The silence that followed was heavier than the noise. Leo let out a long, shuddering breath. With the napkin shielding his eyes from the harsh chandelier lights and Sophie's steady pressure on his chest, his little fists unclenched. Sophie leaned in closer to the baby, whispering the words that would seal her fate. "It's okay, little one. You were just scared. It's all just noise." She stood there for a full minute, humming that low note until Leo's breathing evened out. He was asleep. Slowly, Sophie pulled her hand away. She removed the napkin. Leo stayed asleep. She straightened up and turned to leave, terrified that she had overstepped. "Wait." Dominic Russo hadn't moved. He was staring at his son. Then he slowly lifted his eyes to Sophie. For the first time, she saw the color of them, a startling, piercing gray. "Who are you?" he asked. "Sophie. Sophie Miller." Dominic looked at Sal, then back at her. "My son hasn't slept more than 20 minutes at a time since his mother died 3 months ago." Sophie felt a chill. The rumors were true. His wife, Isabella, had died in a car accident. Or at least that was the official story. "Trauma affects infants too," Sophie said quietly. "He remembers the noise of the crash. Loud environments trigger him." Dominic stood up. He towered over her. He smelled of danger and expensive tobacco. He reached into his jacket pocket. Sophie flinched, expecting a gun. He pulled out a money clip. He peeled off a stack of $100 bills, easily $2,000, and held it out. "Thank you," he said. I can't take that, Sophie said, backing away. It's just, I used to work in the NICU. It's just a trick. Dominic's eyes narrowed. You're a nurse. I was. I'm taking a break. A lie. She had been fired, blacklisted, but he couldn't know that. Keep the money, Dominic said, dropping it on her tray. And bring me a bourbon. Neat. Sophie hurried away, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She thought it was over. She thought she had survived the encounter with the devil. She was wrong. She hadn't just survived him. She had caught his attention. And Dominic Russo was a man who collected things that were useful to him. 2 hours later, Sophie was cleaning tables in the back section. The restaurant was closing. Dominic Russo and his entourage had left an hour ago, taking the sleeping baby with them. Sophie felt a strange hollowness. Seeing that baby, it had brought back memories she had tried to bury. The beeping of monitors, the smell of antiseptic, the reason she lost her license. Miller, Mr. Henderson barked from the kitchen. Manager's office, now. Sophie's stomach dropped. This is it, she thought. I disturbed a VIP. I'm fired. She walked into the office, untying her apron. Mr. Henderson. I'm sorry about earlier. I just thought... She stopped. Mr. Henderson wasn't sitting at his desk. He was standing in the corner, looking pale and sweaty. Sitting in the manager's leather chair was Sal, the massive bodyguard from earlier, and leaning against the file cabinet, looking effortlessly lethal, was Dominic Russo. The door clicked shut behind her. Sit, Dominic said. It wasn't a request. Sophie sat on the hard wooden chair opposite the desk. Mr. Russo, is everything okay? Did Leo wake up? He's sleeping, Dominic said. He was studying her file, her personnel file. He flipped a page. Sophie Miller, age 23. Graduated top of your class from nursing school. Fired 6 months ago from St. Jude's Hospital for negligence. Sophie's face burned. That wasn't true. I was framed. The doctor gave the wrong dosage. I don't care, Dominic interrupted. He closed the file. I don't care if you killed the Pope. All I care about is that for the first time in 90 days, my house is quiet. He leaned forward, elbows on the desk. My nanny Martha, I fired her tonight. She's useless. She fears him. He's a baby, Sophie whispered. He picks up on anxiety. Exactly, Dominic said. You didn't fear him. You didn't even fear me. Not really. He pulled a piece of paper from his pocket and slid it across the desk. It was a contract. I need a nanny, live-in, 24/7 availability. You handle Leo. You handle his schedule, his meals, his doctors. You ensure he sleeps. Sophie looked at the paper. Her eyes widened at the salary figure. It was 5 times what she made here. It was enough to pay off her debts in a year. I can't, Sophie said, pushing the paper back. Dominic's eyebrows rose. Excuse me. I can't work for you, Mr. Russo. I know who you are. I know what you do. And what is it that I do, Sophie? People die around you, she said, her voice trembling but defiant. Your wife died. I'm not going to be next. Dominic's expression darkened. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. He stood up and walked around the desk until he was standing right in front of her. He leaned down, placing his hands on the arms of her chair, trapping her. My wife was murdered, he said softly. And I killed every single man involved. Leo is the safest child in this city, because I am his father. I'm sorry, Sophie said, but the answer is no. Dominic stared at her for a long moment. He seemed to be calculating. Then he sighed as if disappointed. He straightened up and looked at Sal. "Sal, call the hospital board. Tell them we have new evidence regarding the overdose incident at St. Jude's. Tell them Miss Miller has admitted to falsifying records." Sophie shot up from her chair. "What? You can't do. That I didn't do it. I'm trying to get my license back." "If I make that call," Dominic said calmly, "you will never work in medicine again. You'll be lucky to get a job scrubbing toilets in a gas station." "This is blackmail," she hissed. "This is negotiation," he corrected. "I have a problem, a screaming heir. You have a solution, magic hands. I have a problem. I need someone I can trust to watch him who isn't one of my people. My people are soldiers. They don't know how to nurture. You do." He held out a pen. "Take the job, Sophie. 1 year. You pay off your debts. I clear your name with the medical board. I have friends there. You leave with a clean slate." Sophie looked at the pen, then at Dominic. He was a monster. She knew that. He was manipulating her, backing her into a corner. But she also remembered Leo, the way he had clutched her finger, the way he was terrified of the noise. If she didn't take this job, who would Dominic hire? Another Martha? Someone who would let him scream, or worse, would Dominic's enemies get to the baby if someone vigilant wasn't watching? She snatched the pen. 1 year, she said, and I want it in writing that you'll clear my name. Already in clause 14. Dominic said, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. She signed. "Pack your bags," Dominic said, checking his watch. "Sal will drive you to your apartment. You have 1 hour to collect your things. You sleep at the estate tonight." "Tonight?" "Leo wakes up at 3:00 a.m., Dominic said, turning to walk out the door. "I expect you to be there when he does." As Sophie watched him leave, she felt a heavy dread settle in her stomach. She had just signed a deal with the devil. But as she would soon find out, the devil wasn't the one she needed to be afraid of. There was someone else in the Russo organization, someone who had orchestrated the accident that killed Isabella. And by walking into the Russo mansion, Sophie had just painted a target on her own back. The Russo estate wasn't a home. It was a fortress. Sophie watched through the tinted window of the black SUV as they passed through massive iron gates topped with spikes. The driveway was a mile long, winding through perfectly manicured lawns that looked like they had never been touched by human feet. The house itself was a sprawling Gothic manor, all grey stone and dark windows looming against the night sky like a beast waiting to swallow her whole. "Rule number 1, Sal said from the driver's seat, his eyes watching her in the rearview mirror. "You don't go into the East Wing. That's Mr. Russo's private office and quarters. Rule number 2, you don't ask questions about who comes and goes. Rule number 3, you keep the kid quiet." "I have a name," Sophie said, clutching her small duffel bag. "And so does the baby." Sal grunted, pulling the car to a stop in front of the massive oak doors. "Just do your job, nurse. Mr. Russo has fired 5 nannies in 3 months. Don't unpack too much." Sophie stepped out into the chill night air. The front doors opened, and a severe-looking woman with grey hair, pulled back into a tight bun, stood there. This was Mrs. Gersh, the housekeeper. "You're late," Mrs. Gersh said, checking a pocket watch. "Master Leo is already in the nursery. He is due for his 3:00 a.m. feed in 2 hours. You will sleep in the adjoining room." Sophie was led through the house. It was breathtakingly expensive, marble floors, Renaissance paintings, crystal chandeliers, but it was freezing, literally and metaphorically. There were no family photos, no toys on the floor. No signs of life. It felt like a museum for ghosts. They reached the nursery on the second floor. Mrs. Gersh opened the door and left without another word. Sophie stepped inside. The room was dim lit only by a street lamp outside. It was huge, filled with antique furniture that looked terrifyingly heavy. In the center was a crib that looked more like a kit made of dark, polished walnut. Sophie walked over. Leo was awake. He was lying on his back, staring up at a mobile of silver airplanes that was spinning too fast. He wasn't crying yet, but his breathing was hitching. He was building up to it. "Hey there," Sophie whispered, dropping her bag. "You're still awake." She reached into the crib. The sheets were silk cold and slippery. "No wonder you can't sleep," she muttered. "It's freezing in here." She picked him up. He immediately stiffened, his little body tense. He was waiting for the shouting, for the anger. "It's just me," Sophie hummed, pressing him against her chest to share her body warmth. Just Sophie. She carried him to the window. Down below in the driveway, she saw Dominic Russo. He was standing by one of the black SUVs, talking to a man Sophie hadn't seen before. The man was older, with silver hair and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He clapped Dominic on the shoulder, but Dominic stood rigid, looking like a coiled spring. This must be Luca, the uncle. The newspapers called him the consigliere. Dominic looked up. Even from the second floor, Sophie felt his gaze lock onto her. He saw her holding his son. He didn't wave. He just stared for a second, then turned and walked into the house. A moment later, the nursery door flew open. Dominic stood there, smelling of the cold night air and cigar smoke. He loosened his tie, looking exhausted. "I thought I told you to sleep," he said roughly. "He was awake," Sophie said, turning to face him. She didn't flinch this time. "And this room is too cold. He needs flannel sheets, not silk. And that mobile, it makes a clicking sound every time it turns. It's like torture for a baby with sensory issues." Dominic walked further into the room. He looked at the crib, then at Sophie. "That mobile was a gift from my uncle Luca. It's pure silver." "I don't care if it's made of diamonds," Sophie said, walking over to the crib and unhooking the expensive toy. She set it on the dresser with a clunk. "It scares him." Dominic watched her, his eyes narrowing. No one touched things in this house without permission. No one defied him. "You're making a lot of changes for someone who has been here 10 minutes, he said, his voice low. "I'm doing the job you hired me for," Sophie countered. She looked down at Leo, who had rested his head on her shoulder, his eyes finally drooping. "Look, he's relaxing. He likes the warmth." Dominic took a step closer. He reached out his large hand, hovering over the baby's back. He hesitated. It was a moment of heartbreaking vulnerability. The most dangerous man in Chicago was afraid to touch his own son. "He usually screams when I hold him." Dominic admitted his voice, barely a whisper. "Because you're tense," Sophie said softly. "You're waiting for the scream, so he feels it. Here." Without asking, she stepped forward and carefully transferred the baby into Dominic's arms. "Support his head," she instructed. "Relax your shoulders. Breathe." Dominic held the bundle awkwardly. Leo shifted. Dominic tensed up, bracing for the wail. "Breathe," Sophie commanded. She placed a bold hand on Dominic's bicep. "Let it go, Dominic. Just for a second." Dominic exhaled. A long, heavy sigh left his chest. His shoulders dropped. Leo didn't cry. He let out a tiny sigh of his own, and snuggled into his father's expensive suit jacket. For a moment, the room was silent. Dominic looked down at his son with an expression Sophie couldn't quite place. It was a mix of awe and profound grief. "He looks like her," Dominic whispered. "Isabella." Dominic's jaw tightened. The moment was broken. He carefully handed Leo back to Sophie, his walls slamming back up. "Keep him quiet," Dominic said, his voice cold again. "I have meetings all night." He turned to leave, but stopped at the door. "And Sophie, yes, stay away from Luca. If he asks you questions about the baby, about me, you tell him nothing." "Why?" Sophie asked. "He's your uncle." Dominic didn't answer. He just walked out, leaving Sophie alone in the dark nursery with a sleeping baby, and a very bad feeling that the danger in this house wasn't coming from the outside. 2 weeks passed. Sophie had fallen into a rhythm. She had transformed to the nursery. The cold silk was gone, replaced by soft cotton blankets she had ordered online. She bought a white noise machine to drown out the sounds of the guards patrolling the hallway. Leo was doing better. He was smiling. He was sleeping for 4-hour stretches. But something was still wrong. Sophie was a nurse first, a nanny second, and her instincts were screaming. Every day at 2:00 p.m., a maid named Clara brought up a special bottle of formula prepared by the kitchen staff, and every day at 2:30 p.m., Leo would get fussy. His eyes would get glassy, his movements sluggish. Dominic was rarely around. He was fighting a war on the streets. Territory disputes, failed shipments. The atmosphere in the house was suffocatingly tense. When he did come home, he was covered in bruises or blood that he quickly washed away. One Tuesday afternoon, Sophie was rocking Leo. He had just finished his 200 p.m. bottle. He started to twitch, a small tremor in his left hand. Then his eyes rolled back slightly. Sophie's heart stopped. Seizure. She immediately checked his vitals. His pulse was thready. His pupils were dilated. This wasn't colic. This wasn't trauma. This was a reaction. She looked at the empty bottle on the nightstand. A few drops of the white liquid remained at the bottom. Sophie dipped her pinky finger into the bottle and tasted it. It was sweet, sickly sweet. But underneath the artificial sugar, there was a bitter metallic tang. She recognized that taste. She had tasted it during her pharmacology rotations. Benzodiazepines, or maybe a sedative cocktail. Someone was drugging the baby. Sophie felt the room spin. They were keeping him sedated. Or worse, they were slowly poisoning him to make him appear sickly, to keep Dominic distracted and worried. She had to tell Dominic. Now. She grabbed Leo, wrapping him in a blanket, and ran out of the nursery. "Miss Miller." Sal was standing at the end of the hall. "Where are you going?" "I need to see Mr. Russo," Sophie said, breathless. "It's an emergency." "He's in a sit-down with the capos," Sal said, stepping in her way. "No interruptions. Uncle Luca's orders." "I don't care about Luca's orders," Sophie snapped. "Move Sal. It's about his son." Something in her voice made the giant bodyguard hesitate. He stepped aside. Sophie ran down the grand staircase, her shoes slapping against the marble. She reached the double doors of the East Wing library. She could hear voices inside, angry, shouting voices. She didn't knock. She threw the doors open. The room went silent. 12 men in suits were sitting around a massive mahogany table. The air was thick with smoke. Dominic sat at the head, his face bruised, a gun sitting on the table in front of him. To his right sat Uncle Luca, looking smooth and unbothered. "What is the meaning of this?" Luca stood up, his face twisting in anger. "Get this girl out of here." Dominic stood up slowly. He looked furious. "Sophie, I told you never to come in here." "He's being poisoned," Sophie blurted out, stepping into the room, clutching Leo tight. The silence that followed was absolute. "What did you say?" Dominic asked, his voice deadly quiet. "The formula," Sophie said, her voice shaking but loud. "The 200 PM bottle. Every day he gets sick. I tasted it. There are sedatives in it. Someone is drugging him to keep him weak." Luca laughed. It was a dry, hollow sound. "She's hysterical, Dominic. Look at her. A disgraced nurse trying to play doctor. She probably gave him something herself." "I did not," Sophie yelled. She marched up to the table and slammed the empty baby bottle down in front of Dominic. "Test it. Send it to a lab. There is residue in there." Dominic looked at the bottle. Then he looked at Sophie. His eyes were searching hers, looking for a lie. "Dominic," Luca said soothingly, placing a hand on Dominic's shoulder. "This girl is unstable. We know her history. She killed a patient at St. Jude's. She's projecting. We should have her removed." "If you touch me, I'll scream," Sophie warned, pulling Leo closer. Dominic picked up the bottle. He unscrewed the cap. He sniffed it. He looked at Luca. "Who prepares the afternoon bottles?" Dominic asked. "The kitchen staff." Luca shrugged. "Old Rosa. She's been with us for 20 years. "And who oversees the kitchen orders?" Dominic pressed. Luca's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "I do." Dominic's hand moved. In a blur of motion, he grabbed the gun off the table and leveled it not at Sophie but at the center of the room. "Everyone out," Dominic barked, "except Luca. And her." The capos scrambled. Chairs scraped. Within 10 seconds, the room was empty. Dominic walked around the table until he was standing in front of Sophie. He looked at his son, who was whimpering in her arms, looking pale and dazed. "Give me the boy," Dominic said softly. Sophie handed Leo to him. Dominic held his son close, smelling his hair, checking his eyes. He saw the dilation. He saw the tremors. He turned to Luca. The look on Dominic's face was terrifying. It wasn't rage. It was the cold, blank look of an executioner. "You told me he was sickly," Dominic said. "You told me he was weak like his mother. You said maybe I should send him away to a facility so I could focus on the war." "I was trying to help you," Luca shouted, dropping the facade. "You're distracted. You're weak. You're changing diapers while the Irish are taking our territory. A boss doesn't have time for a crying brat." "So you poisoned him?" Dominic asked. "I gave him something to sleep," Luca spat. "Just to quiet him down. It wasn't going to kill him." Dominic didn't yell. He didn't scream. He simply raised his gun. Bang! Sophie screamed and covered her ears. The bullet hit the vase next to Luca's head, shattering it. Luca fell back into his chair, trembling. "I won't kill you today," Dominic said, his voice ice. "Because you're my father's brother. But you are done. You leave this house tonight. You go to the farmhouse upstate. If I see you in Chicago again, I will bury you." "Dominic, listen." "Get out!" Dominic roared. Luca scrambled up and ran out of the room. Dominic stood there, chest heaving. The silence had returned. Sophie was shaking. She had just witnessed a Mafia execution, or near enough. She should run. She should quit. Dominic turned to her. He still held the gun in one hand and the baby in the other. He looked at Sophie, really looked at her for the first time. He didn't see a waitress. He didn't see a servant. He saw a lioness who had just walked into a den of wolves to save his cub. "You were right," Dominic said hoarsely. "I'm a nurse," Sophie whispered. "I know a sick baby when I see one." Dominic walked over to her. He holstered the gun. He reached out and touched her cheek. His hand was warm. "You saved him," he said. "You saved me." For a second, Sophie thought he was going to kiss her. The air between them crackled with electricity, fear, adrenaline, and something hotter. But then he pulled back. His face hardened again. "Pack your things," he said. Sophie blinked. "What, you're firing me?" "I just saved his life." "I'm not firing you," Dominic said. "But you can't stay here. Luca has friends. He has loyalists. He won't forgive this humiliation. This house isn't safe anymore." "Where are we going?" Sophie asked. "Not we," Dominic said. "You. I'm taking you and Leo to the safe house. Tonight. And you." "I have to stay," Dominic said, looking at the door where Luca had fled. "I have to clean house, and it's going to get bloody." The safe house wasn't a bunker. It was a modernist cabin made of glass and timber, hidden deep in the woods near Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, 2 hours north of Chicago. It had been 3 days since the incident in the library. 3 days of silence. 3 days of snow falling so thick it blanketed the world in white. Dominic had driven them there himself, flanked by 3 SUVs of his most loyal men. But once they arrived, he didn't leave. A massive blizzard had hit the Midwest, grounding all travel and turning the roads into ice rinks. For the first time in years, Dominic Russo was trapped. No meetings, no hits, no business. Just a roaring fireplace, a cooing baby, and Sophie. It was 8:00 p.m. on Friday. The wind was howling outside, rattling the floor-to-ceiling windows, but inside it was warm. Sophie was in the kitchen stirring a pot of risotto. She wore oversized sweatpants and one of Dominic's grey t-shirts because she hadn't packed enough clothes. Dominic was sitting on the rug in the living room. The Don of the Russo family, a man who commanded an army, was currently building a tower of soft foam blocks for Leo to knock down. "He likes the red one," Sophie called out from the stove, not turning around. "It's the high contrast." "He likes destroying things," Dominic corrected, a hint of amusement in his deep voice. "It's in the blood." Leo squealed as he swatted the tower. Dominic laughed, a genuine rumble of a sound that made Sophie's stomach flip. She plated the food and brought it over to the low coffee table. They ate on the floor, picnic style, while Leo rolled around on a plush blanket. "You cook Italian better than my chef," Dominic noted, taking a bite of the risotto. "My grandmother was from Sicily," Sophie said. "She taught me that food is love. If you aren't cooking with love, you're just heating up ingredients." Dominic put his fork down. He watched her in the firelight. The harsh lines of his face seemed softer here, away from the city. "Isabella never cooked," he said quietly. Sophie froze. He never spoke about her. She struggled," Sophie asked gently. "She was beautiful," Dominic said, staring into the fire. "Like a statue. But she was cold, even before the depression. She wanted the title of a mob wife. She wanted the diamonds and the fear. She didn't want the life. And she definitely didn't want the baby." He looked at Leo, pain etching his features. When Leo was born, she wouldn't hold him. She said he was too loud, too needy. I hired nurses, nannies. But Leo knew. Babies know when they aren't wanted. Sophie's heart broke for the little boy, and surprisingly for the man sitting next to her. "He's wanted now," Sophie whispered. Dominic looked at her. The air shifted. The distance between them on the rug felt suddenly non-existent. "You're a strange woman, Sophie Miller," he murmured. "I threatened to ruin your life, and yet you cook me dinner and love my son like he's your own." "I don't blame you," Sophie said, meeting his intense grey gaze. "You were a desperate father. I would have done the same." Dominic reached out. His hand, rough and scarred, cupped her face. His thumb brushed over her lower lip. Sophie stopped breathing. "You should be afraid of me," he whispered. "Everyone is." "I'm not," Sophie breathed. Dominic leaned in. His eyes dropped to her lips. Suddenly, the radio on the sideboard crackled to life with a burst of static. "Boss, we have a situation at the perimeter. Sector 4 sensors just tripped." The spell broke instantly. Dominic was on his feet. In a second, the tender father gone, replaced by the soldier. He pulled a handgun from the waistband of his jeans. He was armed even in his own living room. "Stay down," he ordered Sophie. "Take Leo. Go to the panic room in the basement. Now." "Dominic, what is it?" "It's not a deer," he said grimly, checking the slide of his weapon. "Someone found us." Sophie scooped up Leo, who started to whimper at the sudden movement. She ran toward the hidden door behind the bookshelf, her heart pounding. She thought they were safe here. But as she descended into the darkness of the panic room, she realized that when you are with Dominic Russo, there is no such thing as safe. The panic room was a concrete box stocked with water-canned food and a bank of monitors showing security feeds of the property. Sophie sat on a cot rocking Leo, her eyes glued to the screens. The monitors were black and white, grainy night vision. She saw shadows moving in the snow. Gunfire erupted. It sounded distant through the thick concrete like popcorn popping. Pop, 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 pop. On screen 3, she saw one of Dominic's men fall. "No," she whispered. Then screen 4 went black. Then screen 2. They were cutting the feeds. Sophie clutched Leo tighter. "Shh, baby. Shh. It's just noise." 5 minutes passed. 10. The silence was worse than the shooting. Then the heavy steel door at the top of the stairs creaked. Sophie stood up, backing into the corner looking for a weapon. She grabbed a heavy can of peaches. It was pathetic, but it was all she had. "Sophie." It was Dominic's voice, but it sounded wrong, strained, wet. "Dominic, open the lock. The keypad is jammed from the outside." Sophie rushed to the door and spun the heavy wheel. She pushed it open. Dominic stumbled in. He was covered in snow and blood. He slammed the door shut behind him and locked it. Then he slid down the wall, leaving a dark smear of red against the concrete. "Oh my God!" Sophie put Leo in the crib in the corner and rushed to Dominic. He was clutching his side. Blood was pouring between his fingers, soaking his white shirt. "They're gone." Dominic gritted out his face, pale, sweat beading on his forehead. Sal got the last one. But I took a hit." Sophie peeled his hands away. It was a gunshot wound to the abdomen. The bullet was still inside. "You need a hospital," Sophie said, her nurse training kicking in instantly. She pressed her hands against the wound to stop the bleeding. "You're losing too much blood." "No hospital." Dominic gasped. "Roads are blocked. Ambush waiting on the highway. Luca. He sent mercenaries." "Dominic, if I don't get you to surgery, you will die," Sophie said, her voice shaking. "Then do it here." Dominic stared at her, his eyes glazing over. What? You're a nurse. You were top of your class. I'm a nurse, not a surgeon. I can't operate on a kitchen table. There's a med kit. Dominic pointed to a metal cabinet in the panic room. Field surgery kit. Scalpel, forceps, morphine. He grabbed her wrist. His grip was weak. Sophie, if you go outside, they might still be there. You have to do it. Save me. Please. For Leo. Sophie looked at the man she was falling in love with. He was dying. If she did nothing, he would bleed out in 20 minutes. If she tried to drive him, they would be ambushed. She looked at the medkit. Then she looked at Leo, who was watching them with wide, curious eyes. Okay, Sophie said. Her fear vanished, replaced by a cold, clinical focus. Okay, I'm going to save you. She ran to the cabinet. She ripped open the sterile packs. She found the morphine and injected him. This is going to hurt, she warned. Do it. Dominic grunted. For the next hour, Sophie Miller wasn't a waitress. She wasn't a nanny. She was a warrior. Under the harsh fluorescent light of the panic room, with the sound of her own heartbeat thumping in her ears, she cut into Dominic's flesh. She clamped the bleeder. She dug for the bullet. Dominic passed out from the pain halfway through. Sophie prayed he wasn't dead. Clink! The bullet dropped into a metal bowl. Sophie stitched him up. Her hands, which had been steady enough to calm a screaming baby, were now steady enough to sew a man back together. She bandaged him. She checked his pulse. It was weak but steady. She collapsed on the floor next to him, covered in his blood, exhausted. She had done it. But as she sat there watching his chest rise and fall, she noticed something falling out of Dominic's jacket pocket, the jacket he had thrown on the floor. It was a phone. A burner phone. It buzzed. A text message lit up the screen. Sophie shouldn't look, but she did. The message was from an unknown number. Is it done? Did you kill the girl yet? The board won't clear her name until she's gone. Dr. Evans. Sophie froze. Dr. Evans. That was the head doctor at St. Jude's, the man who had framed her, the man who ruined her life. Why was he texting Dominic? And why was he asking if Dominic had killed her? The room started to spin. The board won't clear her name until she's gone. Dominic had promised to clear her name. He said he had friends on the board. Did Dominic know Dr. Evans? Was this whole thing, the job, the baby, the safe house, a lie? Was Dominic working with the man who destroyed her career? Or was Dominic supposed to kill her as payment for something else? Sophie looked at Dominic unconscious on the floor, the man she had just saved. She backed away from him. She grabbed Leo from the crib. The danger wasn't just outside in the snow. The danger was lying right there on the floor. Sophie unlocked the panic room door. She had to run. She didn't know where, and she didn't know how. But she couldn't be here when Dominic Russo woke up. Sophie stood frozen at the door of the panic room, the freezing air from the hallway hitting her face. The phone in her hand felt like a live grenade. Did you kill the girl yet? She looked back at Dominic. He was pale, his breathing shallow, the bandage around his waist already showing a small bloom of fresh blood. He looked vulnerable. He looked like a hero. But he was a liar. She tightened her grip on Leo, who was sleeping soundly against her shoulder, unaware that his father had seemingly bartered his nanny's life. Sophie made a choice. She couldn't trust him. She stepped out of the panic room and ran for the stairs. She reached the living room. The glass walls were shattered. Snow was blowing inside, covering the expensive rugs in white drifts. The bodies of the attackers were gone, likely dragged away by Sal before he died. But the bloodstains remained. She needed the keys to the SUV. She spotted them on the kitchen counter. She grabbed them and turned to the door. "Sophie." The voice was weak, barely a rasp, but it stopped her dead in her tracks. She spun around. Dominic was standing at the top of the basement stairs. He was leaning heavily against the doorframe, his face grey with pain, his shirt open to reveal the bandages she had just applied. He held a gun in his hand, but it was pointing at the floor. "Don't," he wheezed. "Don't go out there." "Stay back," Sophie shouted, backing toward the shattered window. "I saw the phone, Dominic. I saw the text from Evans." Dominic closed his eyes for a moment, grimacing as a spasm of pain hit him. "It's not what you think." "He asked if you killed me yet." Sophie screamed, the tears finally spilling over. "You know him. You know the man who ruined my life. Was this whole thing a lie? Did you hire me just to, get close to me? Make it look like an accident?" "Sophie, listen to me." Dominic took a step forward, stumbling. He dropped the gun. It clattered on the floor, sliding away. He held his hands up in surrender. "I didn't hire you to kill you. I hired you to save you. Liar! Evans works for Luca." Dominic yelled, the effort making him cough. He doubled over, clutching his side. They run a fentanyl ring through St. Jude's. You found the discrepancy in the logs. You didn't know what you found, but they did. They framed you to discredit you. But Luca is paranoid. He wanted you dead." Sophie froze. The wind howled through the broken glass, whipping her hair around her face. "Luca put a contract out on you." Dominic continued his voice, regaining some strength through sheer will. $100,000. Open contract. Any hitter in Chicago could have taken it. He looked up at her, his grey eyes burning with intensity. "I took the contract, Sophie." Sophie gasped. She took a step back, clutching Leo tighter. "I took it," Dominic said, "so that no one else would. As long as the Don of the Russo family held the contract, no other assassin would touch you. I claimed you were mine to kill." So you were going to do it?" "I was going to find out who you were," Dominic said softly. "I followed you to the restaurant that night. I had a gun in my jacket. I was going to wait for you to leave, corner you, and offer you money to disappear." He took a slow, painful step toward her. "But then, you walked up to my table. You weren't a threat. You weren't a rat. You were just a girl who saw a scared baby and wanted to help." Dominic stopped 3 feet away from her. He was shivering from the cold and the blood loss, but he didn't look away. "When you touched Leo, when you made him quiet, I knew I couldn't hurt you. I knew I had to protect you. Bringing you into my house was the only way to keep an eye on you 24/7, to keep Luca from sending someone else." Sophie looked at the phone in her hand. The text from Evans. "Is it done?" "I've been stalling them," Dominic whispered. "Telling them I was waiting for the right moment. Telling them I needed you to nurse Leo first. I was buying time to find the evidence to bury Evans and Luca." Sophie looked at the man in front of her. He was swaying on his feet. He had let her operate on him. He had taken a bullet for her. If he wanted her dead, she would have died in the nursery weeks ago. "Why didn't you tell me?" Sophie asked, her voice trembling. "Because you would have run," Dominic said. "And if you ran, they would have found you. You were safest in the lion's den." He reached out a hand. "Please, give me the phone. I need to reply. If I don't answer, They'll send a second wave. Sophie looked at his hand. Then she looked at his eyes. She believed him. She walked forward and placed the phone in his palm. Dominic didn't look at the screen. He dropped the phone into his pocket and wrapped his other arm around her, pulling her and Leo into his chest. He smelled of copper and sweat, but he was warm. "I got you," he whispered into her hair. "I promise. I got you." Suddenly, headlights cut through the darkness outside. Tires crunched on the snow. Sophie stiffened. "They're back." Dominic looked out the window. He saw the lead car. It wasn't a mercenary vehicle. It was a sleek, armored sedan with a specific crest on the door. Dominic let out a breath he had been holding for hours. "No," he said, slumping against her. "That's not them. That's the cavalry." The doors of the sedan opened. 6 men in heavy tactical gear poured out, but leading them wasn't a soldier. It was an older man with a cane, looking furious. "It's my grandfather," Dominic murmured, his eyes closing. "The retired Don. I called him before the signal went dead." Dominic's legs finally gave out. He slid to the floor, unconscious, just as the men burst into the room. The courtroom was silent. "Case number 402, the judge announced. "The State versus Dr. Anthony Evans." Sophie sat in the back row. She wasn't wearing a waitress uniform. She was wearing a cream-colored silk dress. She listened as the prosecutor laid out the evidence, the fentanyl ring, the falsified records, the text messages found on a burner phone linking Dr. Evans to the organized crime boss, Luca Russo. Luca was already in prison, awaiting trial for attempted murder. Dominic had handed over everything, the recordings, the logs, the testimony. He had broken the code of silence to save her. Dr. Evans was sentenced to 20 years. As the gavel banged, Sophie felt a weight lift off her shoulders that she hadn't realized she was carrying. Her nursing license had been reinstated 3 weeks ago, with a formal apology from the medical board. She walked out of the courthouse and into the bright Chicago sunshine. A black car was waiting at the curb. The window rolled down. Dominic sat in the back. He looked different, rested. The bruises were gone. He wore a navy suit, and in his lap, strapped into a high-end car seat, was Leo. Leo was 1 year old now. He was holding a stuffed lion. He wasn't crying. He was babbling happily at the window. "Did they fry him?" Dominic asked, a smirk playing on his lips. 20 years? Sophie smiled, sliding into the car next to him. "Good," Dominic said. He signaled the driver to move. "Where are we going?" Sophie asked. "Back to the estate." "No," Dominic said. He reached over and took her hand, interlacing their fingers. "I sold the estate. Too many ghosts. Too much cold stone." Sophie raised an eyebrow. "So where are we living?" "I bought a place in the suburbs," Dominic said casually. "Big yard, quiet neighborhood, flannel sheets." Sophie laughed. "A Mafia Don in the suburbs." "I'm retired," Dominic said, looking at Leo. "Grandfather took the chair back for a few years, until my cousin is ready. I have a more important job now." "Oh, and what's that?" Dominic leaned over and kissed her a slow, deep kiss that made her toes curl. "Raising a king," he whispered against her lips, "and loving his mother." Sophie rested her head on his shoulder as the car merged into traffic. The city that had once been a prison of noise and fear now looked beautiful. Leo dropped his toy. He opened his mouth to scream. Sophie and Dominic both looked at him. "It's okay, Leo," Sophie whispered. "We're here." Leo looked at them, blinked, and then for the first time in a long time, he laughed. and that my friends is why you never judge a book by its cover or a waitress by her apron. Sophie went from cleaning tables to ruling the empire, and she didn't just tame the baby, she tamed the beast. I want to know, would you have forgiven Dominic? Or would you have taken that car and run? Let me know your answer in the comments below. If you enjoyed this roller coaster of a story, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you haven't already, subscribe and ring that bell. We have a crazy thriller coming next week about a billionaire who buys a haunted hotel, and trust me, you do not want to miss it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.